네, 안녕하세요, 여러분. 김지윤입니다. 네, 오늘 또 특별한 손님을 한번 모셔봤습니다. 외교안보 쪽에서 아주 유명하신 분이고 또 한국에서도 언론에 회자가 많이 되는 분인데요. 엘브리지 전 국방부 부차관보님을 모셨습니다. 인도태평양 지역에서 미국이 어떤 전략을 가져가야 되는가 이 부분에 대해서 아주 많은 의견을 내놓고 있고 이게 또 화제가 되고 있죠. 직접 한번 만나보겠습니다. So you came over here for the Asian Leadership Forum, and you probably have felt how famous you have become in Korea.
Well, a lot of questions, but it's really a pleasure to be here in Korea. It's been about 5 years since I'm always so impressed by the incredible success of the South Korean society and economy, but also I decided to come because I think the issues that I've been raising in the South Korean media are very important, and it's very important to communicate directly. So I wanted to spend a good amount of time here while I had the honor of participating in the Asian Leadership Conference to be able to communicate my views and my concerns clearly.
Well, so you're a security guy, and also you have been paying very close attention to the Indo-Pacific area. So first of all, I'd like to ask you, tell us about your assessment, how you perceive the level of threat posed by China, both militarily and economically.
I think the level of threat is extraordinary. I mean, it's nearly unprecedented. In fact, Ambassador Nick Burns, who's the Biden administration envoy, has said something quite similar. And that's not because I'm anti-China. I'm not anti-China. Actually, I have great respect for China. I have so much respect for China that I'm concerned. I'm afraid of it because a country with this size and scale and economic productivity, 1.4 billion people who have now unlocked the road to prosperity, to modernization, that is an extremely formidable force. And if you look at the figures, they make that very clear. So if you use market exchange terms, if you use the dollar, essentially, the United States economy remains much larger in terms of the capitalization of our companies and so forth. And that has some utility if you're thinking more in commercial terms. But if you're thinking in geopolitical terms and you use purchasing power parity, China's already a larger economy than we. And their military buildup has been extraordinary. And I think that the Chinese are behaving in a sense as a typical rising great or superpower. In those circumstances, and this is of direct concern to Koreans, the Chinese, I believe, want to create a secure economic sphere, essentially an analog to what the Japanese were pursuing in 1941, which was a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. So their goals are to have a sphere of influence, which dominates Asia, which is now the world's most important area. So the Europeans get very angry at me whenever I say this, but 100 years ago, Europe was the center of the world because that's where the colonial empires were controlled from and the most productive part of the world. Today, it's Asia. That's just a fact. So I think that's something that we need to reckon with, and I think the chances for a conflict are very real. I think China is, in a sense, doing almost everything consistent with preparing for war with the United States. And that's where it becomes very serious for Korea because there's a direct threat to Korea from China, which I believe will grow over time. But the problem is that we, in our vital alliance, we need to be prepared that there will be simultaneous attacks because it's in the interests of China to invite North Korea to take advantage of the situation.
So that actually reminds me of the Foreign Affairs article. The title was North Korea is becoming the asset for China. They're actually suggesting any provocation by North Korea in the Korean Peninsula may serve as distraction. Do you agree with that?
Here's a very important part. We don't need to believe that China controls North Korea for us to be concerned about a simultaneous attack or aggression or provocation because North Korea has its own reasons. They don't need to like each other or agree with each other. They just have a common interest, which is this is the most propitious opportunity for Pyongyang since 1975, maybe since 1950, because the fundamental problem is the United States rationally must reserve its strength for the big fight against China, not because Taiwan is more important than Korea. In fact, it's not. South Korea is more important than Taiwan, but because we are like two heavyweight boxers and we can be challenged at any time. And if we are beaten by the Chinese heavyweight boxer, you're a middleweight boxer. Who will protect you from that heavyweight boxer? So you need us to be here as the heavyweight. And the problem is if we get in a fight with North Korea and get tired and the Chinese challenge us then, we could lose. I'm not saying North Korea isn't a threat. North Korea is a very, very aggressive and dangerous threat. But we need to be realistic about how together we manage the situation.
And that's probably why you oppose further assistance to Ukraine, because
Yeah.
you believe the U.S. has to focus on the region in the Pacific?
Look, this debate it's kind of farcical. It's not serious because obviously the United States has allocated something on the order of $170 billion to Ukraine. Of course, that money and weaponry would have been helpful here. And the American fiscal situation is constrained compared to how it was historically. I sympathize with the Ukrainian cause. I think their cause is just. But look, we need to look at the world through the lens of reality. It's not a morality play. And I think South Koreans understand that because they've been living next to North Korea for a long time. You know that you have to be ready. If you're not ready, it doesn't matter if your cause is just. I don't think the communists in the Vietnam War were the just cause, but they won. The good guys don't always win.
Well, a few days ago, the new president of Taiwan was inaugurated, and China is escalating the tension in the Taiwan Strait. So I have a very straightforward question for you. How likely do you think it is that China will invade Taiwan?
Well, I never put a number on it because I don't know, but I think we have to be prepared that it will happen. First of all, it's a very serious possibility. So given the consequences of failure, of being defeated by China, we have to take account for that possibility. Moreover, the less prepared we are, the more likely it is, because China will know that its attack will be more successful. I mean, Kim Il-sung in 1950, the reason he attacked South Korea was not only because he wanted unification on his terms, but because he thought he would be successful. Now he miscalculated because the Americans were not clear enough about where our defense perimeter actually would be. It's the probability of success, and that's why having the weapons here and having the focus here is so important. And I think, unfortunately, what we see from Taiwan, and I think we saw it from President Lai's remarks, is they are speaking loudly but carrying a small stick. And they are hoping, he talked about the democratic community of nations and how Taiwan would be an MVP of world democracies. And that is completely the wrong way of thinking about Taiwan's security. Let's point something out. Does he think that the European societies will save Taiwan when they can't even supply Ukraine? And people in America, and I know this and I talked to many leading Americans about this, they see the Ukrainians, rightly, as very serious and committed to their security. The sacrifices of the Ukrainian people command respect. That motivates people to support them. The perception about the Taiwanese is that they're not serious about their security, unlike South Korea. And for them to, I think the right policy for us and for Taiwan is to speak softly and carry a big stick, be open to communication and open, I've said that I'm against Taiwan independence, these kinds of things. Be very clear that we are trying to maintain the status quo while building up our military strength, our shield. But right now, they're not building up their military strength. They spend less than South Korea. South Korea faces North Korea. It's a very dangerous country. It has nuclear weapons. It has a very large military. But North Korea, compared to the People's Republic of China, I mean, I've said that to them for several years, they should spend 10%, and people laugh. If it were me, I would spend 10%.
So if the U.S. thinks Taiwanese people are showing their willingness to fight, then what expectation do you have for Korea and Japan?
Right. So Japan, I think, should be involved in the defense of Taiwan because their security is intimately linked to the security of Taiwan. For instance, a PLA manual was just, I saw on Twitter, which talked about how if and when the PRC occupies Taiwan, that they will be able to blockade Japan more effectively, and of course, probably South Korea as well. So there is a strong perception in Japan that Taiwan is very important for Japan. What we should want together is a collective defense effort of the United States, Taiwan, and Japan together. South Korea, my view, we should not insist that South Korea commit significant effort to help defend Taiwan. Why? Because South Korea faces a more direct threat
North Korea
to itself, North Korea. And in the future, the very real possibility of a PLA collaboration with the DPRK to attack South Korea. Why? Because they might want to distract the United States, but they also, in the future, if they want to create this sphere, the best way to do so is to use direct military force to coerce South Korea into their camp, out of the American camp. And the analogy here is because I think a lot of people, when we're thinking about Taiwan, you assume if you want to use direct military force, it means you want to annex that country. But that's not so. Think about the American invasion of Iraq. I think it was a bad idea, but we invaded Iraq not to annex it, or in the Asian context, when Vietnam intervened in Kampuchea, that was not about annexing Cambodia, but rather they imposed a government that was friendly to Hanoi. They deposed the Khmer Rouge. So that's the kind of danger that countries like South Korea and the Philippines need to be concerned about, that they would be subject to direct Chinese military action for coercive purposes. So my view is that South Korea should focus on defending itself. I support USFK being on the peninsula, but the US military needs to focus on China because we are behind the China, in part because of this focus on Ukraine and the Middle East. We are falling behind the PLA, so we need everybody throughout our military
So you think U.S. troops should remain in the Korean Peninsula?
Yes.
Not for vis-a-vis North Korea, but because of China.
Right.
Then don't we need to finish the OPCON transfer in this case?
Yeah, I think we should do
Really?
OPCON transfer as quickly as possible. I believe in South Korea's capability. And
It's very politicized.
I know it's politicized, and I'm looking at this from a strategic perspective. But I'm saying, from our point of view, I think we should want South Korea to assume as much responsibility as quickly as possible. The main point I'm stressing is that allies that face second or third level threats from our point of view need to be prepared to handle those threats mostly on their own. Because actually, if you're China, your best strategy is to invite or induce Pyongyang to go first, because then you have a chance of distracting the Americans and depleting us. Whereas North Korea going second isn't as effective because the Americans would then already be fighting the Chinese.
That's probably why you're saying South Korea is a very serious danger.
I think so.
But still, in Korea, there's some people say that, well, North Korea is not going to do anything very serious provocation because that means, it's a collapse of the regime. So they're not going to do those self-destructive things.
Well, I personally would not be that sanguine, but if that's the case, then what I'm saying, it's kind of like if you buy too much insurance and there isn't an earthquake or a tsunami or something, then you spend some extra money, but probabilistically, it's better. I mean, if that's the case, and North Korea says no, maybe they say no because we are prepared. Maybe they say no to Beijing. But I think the downside risk is so great and the consequences are so grave that we should prepare for the downside.
In one of the interviews with Jungang Daily, I think, you stated, quote, the Washington Declaration entails the risk of exposing several U.S. cities and over 3 million Americans to the threat of retaliatory nuclear attacks from North Korea to provide a nuclear umbrella to South Korea, an ally. I can say that the U.S. cannot keep this promise, unquote. So it sounds like U.S. may not be able to provide a nuclear umbrella for South Korea. Is that right?
Basically, and I think, the Washington Declaration doesn't address the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue, and let me take a minute to explain this. Obviously, for Americans, we can only countenance losing millions of American citizens for something that is really, truly existential. I mean, the United States has never had a war. I mean, South Korea suffered grievously, obviously, in 1950 or under Japanese colonialism. We have never had that experience where whole cities were obliterated by nuclear weapons. And we would, of course, want to avoid that. The scenario in which we could envision running that risk is essentially a kind of World War III against another superpower. So during the Cold War, the Soviet Union, or today against China, maybe Russia to a lesser degree. Why? Because if we lost that war, we would lose, I think, our freedom, and we would lose the way of life that we've had. So that's where you could at least make a rational argument for why we should risk that. North Korea to the United States, there's no way North Korea can present that kind of risk. So if, we actually faced this potential course, this potential choice, people would say, what are you talking about? Why are we doing that? Wait, because of North Korea? North Korea is all the way over there. What can they do to us? It used to make sense because the North Koreans didn't have long-range missile capability, and we had missile defenses that could stay ahead. I don't know exactly what the best analysis, because I'm outside of the government these days, but I think we have to assume, given North Korea's progress on its own missile and warhead development, and then Russian assistance potentially, we have to assume that they have capability, and the numbers are big enough that they would pose a real problem for our missile defenses. And while missile defenses have done pretty well in the conventional level, you have to be perfect, essentially, in the nuclear world. So if North Korea launches a bunch of missiles and 5 of them get through and we lose Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Sacramento, and Los Angeles, wow, that's not success. Here's another thing. In the Cold War, here's something that South Koreans should pay attention to. In the Cold War, there were fallout shelters throughout the United States, and people did duck under their desk drills. Nobody's doing those things in the West Coast of the United States, which tells you how serious this is being taken. And I think, look, bluffing can be a good strategy in poker or in nuclear, but it's kind of on the margin. Fundamentally, you need to have a strategy that you could actually implement some version of it. And right now, I think we're getting so far from something that could actually be implemented. And my view is, it's not helping Koreans to be giving you false sense of assurance, because American government officials can come over here and work on the Washington Declaration and say whatever they want. But no president is actually going to really do that. Forget about whoever wins in this election. It doesn't make sense. Imagine if it costs 2 to 3 million American lives. So I think it's important. I think we have to have a plausible strategy. I think our alliance with South Korea is really vital. And if North Korea does challenge it, especially with China, which I think is plausible, there is a very serious risk that we would balk I would recommend that we balk. It would be crazy.
But the situation, you have to balk.
Yeah. So, but like, let's not wait. And then you're like, wait, I thought you promised me.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry, we were kidding. No, actually, of course, we're not going to do that. That's crazy. And then you're like, wait a minute, now we're really in desperate straits. Hold on. So that's what I'm communicating. So I'm not saying what the answer is. What I'm saying is all options need to be on the table because I take the security of South Korea very seriously. I think our alliances is vital, but we need to have some, realistic basis. And we need to be understanding of your security situation. And if, based on what you see, how you see the threat, especially given how much responsibility that I think we inevitably will need to insist that you assume, we can't be sort of saying, oh, no, you can't do this or that. We have to be more supportive. And the other thing is, look, Kirk Campbell I think he gave some comments where he said nuclear nonproliferation in Asia has been a great success. And I just think that's an absurd statement. It is absurd and insulting. Nuclear nonproliferation has been a total failure because both North Korea and China are in nuclear breakout. They are dramatically increasing the size and sophistication of their nuclear forces. The countries that we've succeeded in stopping from getting nuclear weapons are South Korea. And then we don't have a credible extended deterrent. Instead, we sign a piece of paper and we send a ballistic missile submarine to Busan, which changes nothing, doesn't do anything. And the whole point of a ballistic missile submarine is to be hidden. So sending it to a port is like
We are there.
totally pointless. So I think sensible people who are taking the situation seriously across the political spectrum understand. And I've heard from actually, that they are saying to my arguments, they're like, yeah, and that kind of makes sense.
In that case, it is inevitable for us to have our own nuclear weapons because we cannot rely on the United States nuclear umbrella. Then don't we need our own?
Well, I think that's a decision for you to.
The Korean public will love it.
Well, I think it's not my place to say exactly how you should handle this situation. Maybe the Korean people are going to be willing to tolerate the reality that our extended deterrent is kind of flimsy.
But because the U.S. has been very adamant for not allowing Korea to have a nuclear program.
Well, policies change. If you look at the U.S. policy towards the French nuclear program, that showed we provided certain kinds of assistance, let alone just neglecting. And actually the official position of the North Atlantic Alliance is that the independent nuclear weapons arsenals of the United Kingdom and France contribute to the security of the alliance. So if we applied that logic, I don't see why we should be treating Europeans differently than East Asians. I think we could apply a consistent logic. Of course, we would prefer non-proliferation. But we also say that we're going to get rid of nuclear weapons, but everybody understands that's not going to happen anytime soon. So we have to take measures that are consistent with a realistic approach to security.
Well, Mr. Trump, former President Trump expressed his interest in engaging with Kim Jong-un. So some people are saying, is there going to be another summit if re-elected? And even some people are saying that, well, maybe the U.S. recognize the North Korea as the nuclear state and lift some sanctions in exchange for nuclear freeze. Is it possible?
Well, I don't know what President Trump has planned. Again, I don't speak for him. But just like if you're only talking to your friends, you're not really doing diplomacy. So I think outreach to Kim Jong-un could make sense. Obviously, we need to be skeptical about what we can realistically expect, not only in what they commit, but in what they'd actually follow through on. I do think, I think obviously denuclearization is not a realistic objective at this point diplomatically. I think a plausible goal for a diplomacy with Kim Jong-un would be limiting its long-range striking power, not because we're saying that Americans are more important than Koreans, but rather because the extended deterrent model could work if we could limit North Korea's long-range striking power. But I'm just skeptical that it would work. But on the other hand, you could do what we used to do during the Cold War, which was we would engage while we build up.
This is actually my personal question. How much does the U.S. trust Korea?
The thing about that is I'm always like this focus on trust is I personally have a very positive attitude towards Korea. I think it's pretty amazing country, very amazing country. And it's got an incredible record, not only in the Korean War and sustaining, but Koreans were in Vietnam. That's a pretty darn good record. Do I trust Koreans? Absolutely. No. Do I trust other Americans? Absolutely not. No. So there's no perfect trust. And I think this is an important message that I actually send to a lot of our allies is you shouldn't trust us 100% either. That's my whole point. I think ultimately the surest basis for alliances is shared interest. And I think we do have a very strong interest. From my perspective, I can say that South Korea is a critical ally because it's one of the world's largest economies. It really pulls its weight. It's located in a very important geography from your perspective, I mean, I'm not Korean, but just thinking about it rationally, you need somebody to help protect you against especially China, because even though South Korea is an incredibly impressive and advanced state in a global context, it's a very small country in its immediate area. I mean, you live in a really tough geography. So you need to have a heavyweight boxer on your side, and we're the only option out there. So it's kind of like, it makes sense. And I think I occasionally hear that, the Koreans are pulled towards neutrality. And I just, again, I'm biased, I'm an American, but I think this is a rational argument. Neutrality is a chimera, it's a myth, because you're too important to be ignored. You invite the Chinese to bring you into their sphere. And if you don't do what they want, they will use force against you. So neutrality is this false hope. You have to make a decision. If you were located where New Zealand is, New Zealand can, I mean, they're kind of an ally, but they're basically sort of neutral.
Kind of ally.
Like, yeah. No, well, I'll take more South Koreas than New Zealand's, please. You have to pick a side to be safe, I think is a prudent decision. And of course, we're not perfect, but we're very distant. The analogy I like to use is President Biden refers to our alliances as sacred. And I'm thinking, well, nothing in politics is supposed to be sacred. That's kind of the point of the American political system. And that's not realistic. Nobody actually believes that. What an alliance is like a very close business partnership. You're very close socially. There's a lot of trust. You've worked together over many generations. It's deep. But at the end of the day, you're supposed to do your work, and it's supposed to be in everybody's interest. And if one guy is just, not doing anything, and he's, not taking care of like making sure that the gas doesn't light on fire or something, you need to have a tough talk with that person. And you need ultimately the business needs to succeed. And that, I think, is kind of the analogy that I use here, where I think Korea is really a business partner, that we do have a close relationship. We do socialize with our families and we do go on vacation together, but also you make money for the company. I think that's a very solid basis. That's sort of the way I think about the trust relationship issue.
I was going to ask you about your ideal form of ROK-US alliance in the future. You answered that already, but
the form of alliance that we need in general is states that are strong, serious, resolute, and self-reliance. Now, in the case of the ROK vis-a-vis North Korea, I think there has to be a lot of self-reliance. But I think because ROK is right next to China and is directly threatened by China, we need to sustain an integrated alliance. It's a bit different than in Europe or the Middle East, where I think the United States' role is going to be needs to be smaller than it has been. But I think more an image, instead of like Djokovic and everybody else is like the ball boys or something, it's more like a football team or a baseball team. Maybe we're the biggest player, maybe we're the quarterback, but everybody needs to be playing their part. And I don't say that we're the quarterback because I'm saying we're better. But we just have the scale as the United States. So it's more of a team effort mindset. Actually, I think a lot of the logic that I'm going back to is really like more of the Cold War thinking, rather than the post-Cold War world, when we got into this kind of hubris of Madeleine Albright. We see farther than everybody. We are the best. Everybody else is our. No. Like, look, I love us. We're great. We're awesome. But like, we need a team. We need a team.
Why Djokovic? Least popular guy.
Depends on who you're talking to. Yeah.
All right. I think that's it. Yeah, that's
different than Tony Blinken.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure.